And although I'm not 30 yet, I still have a couple more years. I do feel as though I am at a place where I can embrace my 30s confidently. Welcome back, friends. If you are a returning subscriber, I'm sending you so much love. Thank you so much for being here. It means a lot to me. I've been doing this for a couple of years now, and for those of you who have been here since the beginning, or for those of you who continue to come back over the past year, I appreciate you so much. If you happen to stumble upon this channel and you are perhaps a new subscriber, if you're not subscribed, I just wanted to tell you, please hit the red button. But I wanted to tell you that we are a community of women, what I like to call the femininity revolution, who of course embrace our femininity, but we also like to adhere to more of like a traditional way of living. And by traditional, what we mean is different from the everyday modern woman. Of course, we're not going back to horse and buggy times, but we don't necessarily identify with that boss babe hustle culture mentality that is so prevalent and pushed on young women today. A little disclaimer, I just had a baby a couple months ago. He is in his swing. You might hear some coos, you might hear this little sound in the background, which I'm trying to fix, but that is simply him and his baby swing. All right, so let's dive right into it. What I want to discuss with you today is how you can get your life together before you are 30. The goal of this video isn't necessarily to mold you into like this perfect version of a woman that has everything together in a more traditional sense by the age of 30. It is just to encourage you to take the necessary steps in your 20s so that you reach a place when you are in your 30s that you feel proud of, that is truly reflective of what you want. So that kind of segues into my first point, which is if you do not want what is the ideal of a modern woman, then be honest with yourself. It is a very uncommon choice to, for example, say that you want to stay home with your kids for several years beyond a maternity leave, or you want a more traditional marriage with a masculine provider husband, or you simply want a job that is going to allow you to put family at the center of your lifestyle. These are all things that are looked down upon in most portions of North America as well as Europe. Now, there are certain places where you can live. A lot of people like to point out this on TikTok, that there are certain states, certain provinces in Canada, for example, where you can find a larger portion of people who have similar values. However, many of us don't necessarily have the choice on where we are going to live, and so we have to deal with that criticism when we tell people about our goals. The earlier on that you are honest with yourself in your 20s, the easier it's going to be to own that decision, because you're going to exercise that muscle that gives you more confidence. The first time that you receive criticism or backlash for expressing your desires and your dreams is probably going to be mentally taxing. It's going to give you a blow to your self-esteem. But the more that you do it, the more that you feel confident, that you perhaps find out little things that you can say to deal with that, or methods to avoid the conversation with people that you know are never going to change their minds, the easier it's going to be to cultivate a life surrounding what you actually want. Just like many career women would receive the advice to own it, you have to do the same. I've talked about this at length on my channel before, but I lived several years of my life in my early 20s chasing after what a smart woman should do for her goals. I did schooling programs that weren't necessarily in alignment with what I wanted deep down, and it took me a lot of time to reconcile the fact that what you do every single day for a living doesn't necessarily equate to your worth as an individual. And when I finally flipped on that switch of being honest with myself, of committing to the fact that I would not feel insulted if somebody said something to me about my choices, the more liberated I felt in what I was doing. And although I'm not 30 yet, I still have a couple more years. I do feel as though I am at a place where I can embrace my 30s confidently because I have chosen what is best for me. This also lays a great foundation for the next point, where I'm going to dive deeper into relationships. It's like the sentiment I expressed. Being honest about what you want in a relationship is key. Modern culture does tell you to kind of exercise your options and to date around and to sleep around as well. You know, I grew grew up in the era of Cosmo magazine, and at that time in my teenage years, I kind of assumed, because of what I was reading, that I would just go in my 20s and I would enter college and I would finally be at a place where I would be okay with having a one-night stand. However, when I reached college, I did not feel that way at all, and it was definitely out of the norm. However, I always knew that I wanted to get married early, and I found that that kind of behavior probably wouldn't lead me to my goal. So I was honest with myself that I would have to date differently than everybody else. I also kind of had to navigate the environment of casual dating, meanwhile trying to find my husband. I made a video a long time ago about the Mrs. degree, and I knew that university was the perfect place to find my husband. I did end up leaving university having found my husband, but this didn't mean that I didn't have several other relationships that I had to cut off early because I knew that those men weren't for me. When I talk about dating ruthlessly, like I have in the previous videos, I want you to understand that it's important to have the conversations with those people early on so that you are not wasting time. And I do find that the more often that you do this, that you are able to cut off those dating relationships early, it makes you more open to actually meeting the person who is going to be your husband. We don't want this to be completely transactional, for example, because there is that element of love and attraction. And out of all the people that I had dated before, there's nobody who even comes close to my husband in terms of that actual attraction that we have for each other. But at the same time, I do feel like I was able to get the total package based on my standard because I didn't waste time in dating people that were not for me. And I also want to encourage you not to have superficial standards. When I talk to a lot of women in their 20s, they are looking for millionaire men or men who have six packs. While all those things can be wonderful, those aren't necessarily the factors that should be the highest on your list. I've mentioned in my How to Become a Traditional Wife video that compatibility is a big factor. And when I talk about compatibility, I don't mean that he likes the color green and you like the color green, or like you like movies from the 80s and he likes movies from the 80s. Like, those are all great things to have. My husband and I have many of those things in common, but what I am referring to are the big life goals. So once you have that initial attraction to the person that you think could be your future husband, you want to early on get those big questions out of the way. There are many ways to do this without coming off as an overbearing woman. An example that I have for you is the simple 5-year plan question that was very popular in my generation. But there are also playful ways that you can do it. For example, you can be on a date with a man and tell him that you want to get to know him better. So he's going to ask you a question and you're going to ask a question. And then you can put silly questions in there. For example, coffee or tea. But as you build that connection and you laugh over those small things, you can progress to deeper questions such as his 5-year plan. And if you are somebody who wants to get married a little bit younger because you want to start having kids a little bit younger, and this man tells you that he doesn't see himself married within 5 years, then you know that it's probably not going to work out. Next up, we have to talk about fertility. I have mentioned this countless times because it is something that is very sensitive for me, since it took almost 2 years for me to conceive the baby that I have now that you hear is swing in the background. So he is very special to me. Although we can't always control if we are going to find a husband in our 20s, we can take the necessary steps to preserve our fertility. I definitely am going to give you big sisterly advice right here, and I'm going to tell you that if you are on hormonal birth control to prevent a pregnancy and you are not in a relationship that is going to result in marriage, I would ask you to perhaps reconsider this intimate relationship. I'm going to link some resources down below on cycle syncing. Also, seeking more natural healthcare providers can help you set your hormones, because if you're getting married in your 30s, you might want to start having kids right away, and you don't want to go through those 2 years that I went through at the beginning of my marriage trying to reset my hormones to be able to conceive this baby. Now let's talk about beauty and style. I usually include beauty and style in a majority of my videos, but I want to reiterate something that I said a long time ago, which is advice that my mother gave to me. It was of course in French, so as I tell you this in English, it's going to sound a little bit harsh. What she always told me growing up is that every woman can can be beautiful by 30. And what she meant by this was that you want to use your 20s. When you get out of that awkward puberty phase in your teenage years that some of us have, seems like Gen Z is not having that phase, but many of us still had that phase. Your 20s is an excellent opportunity to have more of a level playing field on getting to know your body, because it's not changing as much. Your body shape, what clothes are flattering, the colors that look good on you, the makeup that will be in your sustainable beauty routine. I'm actually thinking of making a video, although I'm not a beauty guru. Like this video or let me know down below if you're interested in knowing more about my beauty routine, just to give you an idea of what like an average woman who has a sustainable beauty routine, and I don't mean it in the eco-friendly way, I mean it as in something that I do every single day. I also wanted to tell you, as a woman who is approaching her 30s in a couple of years, that my personal goal is to be at a spot where I know what works for me, so that I'm going into my 30s in preservation mode. I don't believe that my 30s is going to be a decade where I'm exploring new styles, where I'm exploring new makeup, beauty, etc. Those are all things I want to get done in my 20s, so that I'm at a spot where I can put more effort into preserving my beauty in my 30s as I begin to age. So I've put in a lot of the hard work at the beginning of my 20s. I'm still refining it now, as you have seen in some of my vlogs where I talk about my hair, for example. And because I want more kids, I don't want to have to go into a whole overhaul makeover or a whole overall health and diet spree in my mid-30s. I want to establish those habits now. A little factor that I want to talk about with regards to career, for those of you who may want a more traditional lifestyle, but you want to work as well, or you are somebody who wants to return to work. On that point, you have to understand that you don't have to live life all at one time. There are certain versatile jobs. I regret not going into nursing for my undergraduate degree and having simply gone into biology because I thought I was going to become a doctor. Because as somebody who has nurses in the family, I have seen that that type of a job is an easier job to take a couple years off and then go back to, or to find part-time work. Explore your options so that you can best tailor a job to the lifestyle that you want, and start thinking about that now, because I wasted about 2 years in my early 20s deciding on what I was going to do, and essentially wasting money on schooling like I've talked about before, and feeling lost, which actually kind of spiraled down into a little bit of a depression, versus I should have done it the other way around. So I also want to encourage you to learn practical skills. This is an element that I talked about in my How to Become a Traditional Wife video. But as you progress to your 30s, it isn't so cute anymore not to know how to cook, not to know how to clean, not to know how to manage money. You don't have to be a financial whiz. But if you are somebody who wants a more traditional marriage where you are going to be mostly in charge of the homemaking aspects, you might have the responsibility of managing the everyday finances. So you're going to want to know how to budget, or at least how to negotiate down your bills, how to create a schedule, pay those bills. Everybody's beliefs on finances is a little bit different, so I don't necessarily put out super concrete advice. But what I personally wish that I had established in my early 20s was the mentality of being more careful with the money that I spent on a day-to-day basis, on having more of a frugal mindset, because this pays off no matter what income level you and your husband get to. And as many of you have seen, I have cultivated that mindset as I have progressed through homemaking. I've talked about in the past how my goal was to live the same day-to-day lifestyle regardless of the amount of money that my husband was bringing in. Being careful with money, being responsible with money is something that I want to show to my future children, and is something that I'm still working on, especially if my husband watches this video, he might laugh. Same goes with cooking. You don't have to be a 5-star chef. You just have to have go-to recipes. Pinterest, just put in easy dinner simple recipes, and once you've mastered at least 20 of those and you can have them on rotation, I think that that is an excellent basis to enter your 30s with. Now, I do want to talk about female friendship. That being said, I encourage you to cultivate sisterhood, to try to let go of those barriers that perhaps cause you to feel negative emotions towards what somebody else has or what somebody else is doing. I look back now on my early 20s and I realize that I was blessed to have had the opportunity to do this through pageants as well as being in a sorority. Because once you exercise that muscle of being happy for other women, of being able to actually give them honest advice without what many women do in terms of backhandedly sabotaging them, this will prove invaluable. Because as you enter in your 30s, those female friendships, I'm telling you right now, even though again I'm not in my 30s yet, but I am in my late 20s, having those friendships with other women who are able to give me valuable mom advice, who actually care about my marriage, who actually care about my son, because I am giving them the same level of respect in return, is so amazing to have. Although your husband is a great companion, having a female friendship, not one that is based in complaining, that's a little caveat I have to put there, one where the person can give you true advice on how to improve yourself, or who you can come to honestly and tell them to give you feedback about what you can do better on a particular circumstance, is just going to help you become a better person. Lastly, I do want to dive a little bit into a psychological aspect, the heavier part of this video. Many of us grew up in the era of participation trophies. It is so hard for us to receive genuine feedback. Kind of piggybacking off of the previous point that I talked about in terms of having friendships that can give you genuine feedback. I encourage you to be honest with yourself. Understand that you are not a perfect person. The earlier that you can do that in your 20s, the better off you're going to be. I have noticed such a big difference in my marriage, for example, by being able to do this. I do not expect praise for just being who I am as a person. Although we are all valuable in the eyes of God, this doesn't give us an excuse to continue negative behavior. I've always talked about not being afraid to fail, or understanding that you're human and you may have done something that you regret in the past, but this doesn't give you the excuse to continue doing it. Be honest with yourself about the bad habits that you have. I used to be a person who would sometimes be lazy and then blame it on the fact that I was tired. But that didn't serve me, because I had responsibilities to do as a full-time homemaker. Although I had the liberty to rest more often than somebody who has a 9-to-5 job, there are certain things like not having my husband's clothes that he needs for work done the next day that aren't just things that can be fixed by saying, oh, I'm sorry about that. Even though he's very understanding, this doesn't help anybody because he's not ready for work. He can't wear the appropriate clothes, which ends up making him late for his meeting. And that affects the whole family entirely because he's not able to do his job properly. Same thing to do with eating as well as exercise. I've talked about in the past how I don't necessarily have strict schedules in terms of what I eat and what I do every single day, but I have to create a routine where I have a block of time that is open for me to do Pilates or walking or whatever I feel like doing that day. But I need to be disciplined and honest with myself that in that block of time I have to move my body. So although I'm giving myself options, which helps me exercise my feminine energy so I can go more with the flow of my day, I do have a structure of the fact that things need to get done. It takes a lot of mental discipline to be honest with yourself that you might not be the healthiest that you can be right now. And we live in a culture that is so consumed with embracing our flaws that the line between acknowledging our flaws and understanding that there's buffer space to improve and that you're not a perfect person and sitting in those flaws has become very blurred. So although I don't expect perfection of myself and I let myself slip up sometimes, I'm working on forcing myself to create better habits that will sustain me within my 30s. Because like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I don't want to enter my 30s with the attitude that I need to completely overhaul my lifestyle. I want to be able to front load the efforts in my 20s while I still have more of that energy, with that decisional energy to do so that I'm ready to live my 30s to the best that I can. Anyway, friends, I'm going to end that video right here. As always, please like the video because these are the kinds of videos that I want to get out there with the message that I'm most passionate about. And I also want to know down below, how are you preparing for your 30s? Or what did you do in your 20s if you are over the age of 30 that helped you really embrace your 30 in the most positive light as a more traditional woman? I will see you next time, lovely feminine friends. Bye-bye.